The Legend of Zelda! This Nintendo fantasy adventure series is in the hearts of many people, both young and older. In essence, it is also one of the founders of the fantasy adventure genre. To this day, it is still used as a great example of how adventure games as a whole should conduct themselves. But games of this scale often don't get by without cutting some content, be it at any stage, either an initial plan for content to exist, or for the content to be created, put onto the game disc, but then never used. And before you say it, no, this is not just another cut content beta video on the Legend of Zelda franchise, because doing that on the whole franchise, oh, we'd be here forever. Let's see, I can start the video by talking about this cut dungeon from Ocarina of Time, and then I can talk about that other dungeon cut from Ocarina of Time. Ooh, and then that other dungeon cut from Ocarina of Time. And then I can start getting into the Link to the Past with that other cut dungeon.
Hey yo, I think you're forgetting about that cut dungeon in Ocarina of Time.
Oh, right, thank you. HMK?
What's good, Loxton? So, I heard you're making a cut content video.
Well, sort of, though this project is quite a bit different though. Rather than just listing off all of the cut content, we're going to be looking at it and comparing it with the knowledge of the Zelda franchise as we know it currently, and try to speculate on what could have been had this content not been cut. And that goes as far as the gameplay mechanics to the lore of the whole story, overarching plot and all that. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Oh boy, that sounds like it's gonna be a blast. I'm helping you out with this one.
Hey, fine by me. How about you start by explaining how we know about all this cut content?
Well, cut content can be found through a few different means. We can look at trailers and manuals for old screenshots. We can look at the developers' interviews about the game in its early development. We can look at concept art, play prototypes and beta tests of the game, or just straight up hack into the final product to find what's in the data.
And so, without further ado, let's look at what The Legend of Zelda could have been.
Let's start with Skyward Sword. For the most part, this game remained intact from what the developers originally envisioned. However, one major change the dev team decided to do was change Hyrule into Skyloft, as we can see in these console parts.
The whole kingdom of Hyrule, castle and all, are floating above. So initially the idea was just to have a floating Hyrule rather than a new place called Skyloft.
This change may be the reason why Skyward Sword takes place so early in the timeline, as speaking chronologically the first game in the series, before the Kingdom of Hyrule was founded. Initially, this looks like this wasn't the original plan.
And if they hadn't changed to this, Skyward Sword could have easily fit somewhere else in the timeline without changing much. Simply put, the Kingdom of Hyrule was lifted into the air by the great goddess Hylia in order to protect it. A similar situation to the Wind Waker, only being surrounded everything with air instead of water. A significantly less lethal approach.
The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess E3 trailer showed off a lot of areas that wound up never being present in the final version of the game. One of which was just another fishing hole, but rather than speculating on what sorts of fish may exist in it, thus changing the fate of Zelda forever, the one we'll look into more is the Dark Forest. The Zelda franchise is no stranger to mysterious woodland areas of high importance, so there's no telling what sort of treasures were originally planned to be found inside. What makes this forest area stand out even further, though, is its contrast to the other changes made between the beta and final versions of Twilight Princess. Initially, the entire overworld was a lot darker, more barren and full of destruction, almost looking like a post-apocalyptic Hyrule. So a fully preserved forest in the midst of all that? That is very suspicious, and is bound to house some sort of legendary item.
Also, the overworld being a much more derelict can go hand in hand with another big change as seen in the E3 trailer.
The Twilight Realm in this trailer was originally black and white. Simple, subtle. I liked it. Before they changed it into the ethereal, oversaturated atmosphere. But going back to the original black and white look, could there be a connection to another Zelda game? What was the original plan? Something like this. We have seen before, haven't we? Indeed, it was the original sealed, sunken state of Hyrule in the Wind Waker. Back when this trailer first hit, I was getting mad ideas and theories from this supposed connection. Could it be that Twilight Princess was connected to the Wind Waker in a radically different way than we all thought? The official Zelda timeline did not exist at this point in time, so there were no hard timeline rules to follow when connecting Zelda games, so Nintendo could have claimed that Twilight Princess was before or after any game. Perhaps Nintendo meant that the Twilight Realm in Twilight Princess was originally supposed to succeed in engulfing Hyrule, and that Ganondorf, who was revealed to be the true antagonist in Twilight Princess, was using this power to conquer it, and that is what led to the Great Flood. Perhaps Twilight Princess was either a doomed journey from the beginning, or that Wind Waker was to be a what-if installment showing what would happen if you failed in Twilight Princess. Perhaps as Nintendo's way of trying to retcon Wind Waker's events of drowning Hyrule. That's what it could have been.
As for other content cut from Twilight Princess, I feel like these are worth mentioning. First, there is a fully coated-in boss that goes unused. It's a rock golem, though instead of being made of rocks, it is entirely made up of Gorons. So apparently, originally at some point the story had a bunch of Gorons getting so angry at Link, they all wanted to kill him. Or they were all possessed. That is a possibility as well. But what else is interesting is that Sheik, Zelda's magically transformed alter ego, was also planned to be in Twilight Princess as well. In Twilight Princess, you meet an imprisoned Zelda early on, so later meeting Sheik, and Sheik eventually being revealed as Zelda, may have actually worked out fairly well. The idea being that Zelda could not escape, but Sheik's skills in stealth and mobility can. So perhaps after completing a quest you bring some magical tome to Zelda, and then she can learn how to transform into Sheik just like her ancestor. And as Sheik, she then escapes. But ultimately, Sheik was cut from the game. And this is merely something that could have been.
Now we'll look at what could have been when it comes to The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. There was a lot of planned islands that didn't make it into the final cut of the game, including Stovetop Island, a volcanic island that has a bunch of hot springs. Knowing that there are a lot of unused islands in the game's data, as well as being vastly planned, it would seem that the Great Sea was planned to be a lot less sparse, to have lengthened the game and changed its pacing. Instead of going to the next island for your next mission, you could have stopped at a side island or two.
What gets really interesting is that Wind Waker was initially going to span years, rather than like a month? Concept art and developer notes for the game shows an aging Link. While we're unsure if he would steadily grow over the course of real-time gameplay, or jump up a certain height after certain events, this would have proven to be a really unique mechanic. Starting your journey as a wee lad and fighting Ganondorf as a young man? That sounds awesome. Though a mechanic like this would be very difficult to pull off, both for the developers and for the poor little GameCube. Having to deal with all the animation differences from each stage of height as he gradually grows would prove very tricky. Plus there's the issue of conveying years passing by to the audience. So it's understandable why this was ultimately cut. But a future Zelda may come back to this idea, and it may wind up, because of that idea, becoming one of the most memorable Zelda titles to date.
Wind Waker's direct sequel, Phantom Hourglass, had a lot of the same cut content as the original Wind Waker did, including a lot of islands that were unused in the game's data and a bunch of concepts that didn't make it into the final game. According to Hyrule Historia, this mysterious island was supposed to expand every time Link visited it, maybe by bringing items to the residence and building up the island every time you go there. That means an entire side quest from this game has been scrapped. What's thankfully missing though is this man-powered boat that Link would visit with a fat version of Lionbeck at the helm. This boat will be pedaled by Tingle and his siblings. We can speculate that the more siblings you find of Tingle, the faster the boat goes when you get them to pedal it. And since a fat version of Lionbeck was here, we can speculate that this was the original boat that you were supposed to use in the Phantom Hourglass, considering you can upgrade it and stuff with more Tingles. If this was the case, then Tingle would have been a much more important character in Phantom Hourglass, and we'll see him a lot more. But I can understand why he was cut, and his family. No loss there, really.
The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time had a lot of cut content, though that is understandable as 3D games were still new, so the developers were bound to have had a lot of trial and error. Most of what was cut was inconsequential. There's a good number of enemies that were cut, a good number of rooms and items and such. There was an R-Wing that would shoot Link and then would go down in a fiery death after you shot it with an arrow. But that doesn't really matter to the overall everything with Zelda. What does get interesting, though, is that Gerudos were originally going to be a lot more aggressive, and we know this thanks to some scratched animations. The Gerudos have crouch and attacking animations, so perhaps they would attack you upon finding you, and crouch behind walls to sneak up to you. Link was originally going to be a lot stronger in combat as well, as he has animations which reveal him blocking with the bow and longsword, as well as the ability to do front flips and fire a beam from his sword when his health is full, just like previous Zeldas. These may have all been removed for balancing reasons, but you can clearly see that initially, combat was a lot more complicated, more advanced.
Ocarina of Time also has quite a number of removed cutscenes, including ones that tell the stories of the goddess creating the Triforce, and other cutscenes that give hints to the whereabouts of the first 3 temples. Considering these full cutscenes are still in the game data, but not seen in the game, may hint that Ocarina of Time would have been filled with many more cutscenes on top of these, but these 2 were left behind. If they all were to remain, then the Zelda of today could be full of even more and longer cutscenes, as the first 3D Zelda would have set the norm. The medallions in Ocarina of Time were also meant to be much more important items, and that is saying something. Initially, they were to teleport you to the temples rather than your ocarina, and they were to be equipable items that allow you to fire magical arrows, each medallion granting you a different elemental magic.
If this feature were to be left intact, then a whole number of other and possibly more complicated puzzles may have been in the game that would have required more elemental magics and arrows. And actually, by looking at the loss of Link's sword beam ability and his other mess of magic spells that should have made it into Ocarina of Time, magic would have been a much larger role in the game, not only just Link's. And in future Zelda games, Link may have been able to use more magic if this was the norm in Ocarina of Time. If this Ocarina of Time magical Link was already a set Link, we could have seen a Spellblade Link in the future.
Majora's Mask also has many cutscenes removed, most of which are still found in the game's data. These show the Great Fairy teaching Link his new abilities. More interesting than that, however, is this mask of young Link. According to its data, it would have been worn by Skull Kid. So initially, was Skull Kid going to be an even more nefarious character? Going through and pestering all of the village people and getting them to all blame young Link for his shenanigans? It's possible. And if that were the case, what other sort of nefarious deeds were they planning to have Skull Kid get involved in? Another feature that was intriguingly removed was the ability to save anywhere. It was present in the beta, but by the time the final game was released, you had to again go to save points. So what could have been here is a much better saving function. Why was that removed?
The twin Zeldas, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, are often forgotten about. Each tell one big story, and you can play them together in any order using a password that you get from completing one of the games, and entering it at the beginning of the other game. Each game focuses on one of the 3 oracles, Din and Nehru.
Wait, that's 2. But you said there were 3.
There are 3. In fact, this is the biggest cut content in all of Zelda history, an entire game. Originally, this duology was supposed to be a trilogy, focusing on the 3rd oracle, Feor.
The game was to be called The Legend of Zelda, The Mystical Seed of Courage, and according to interviews, development got pretty far along in this 3rd game, but eventually things got too challenging. It's hard enough to have 2 games work hand in hand with each other, and work being played in any order with the use of passwords. But making it 3? Now you have 6 different possibilities of play order to deal with. Not to mention having to figure out how all 3 stories are going to work together. So, it was thrown out altogether. Fiora did not get a game about her, but we can assume that the game would have had a similar plot to the other 2, with some new villain trying to capture Fiora in order to sacrifice her to resurrect Ganon. We don't have much info to speculate on, but basically, we know that the Zelda franchise could have been one game bigger.
Being the first Zelda title, this game had a lot of ideas tested that were all ultimately cut from the final game. For instance, did you know that Link's original name was Christo?
Strange.
Yes, well on to the good stuff. At the end of 2010, a prototype copy of the original Zelda was leaked onto the internet, and it had quite a large number of differences. Most of these things were minute and didn't matter so much. Things like dungeon layout and enemy placement were all completely different, but that doesn't really change anything in the overarching Zelda as a whole. What is interesting though, the manual for Zelda shows a screenshot of the old man that gives you a sword at the beginning of the game. Except in the screenshot he's offering you a sword or a boomerang. Imagine if this became the standard for all future Zeldas. You can start either as a sword user or a boomerang user. Of course, coming to the newer Zeldas, this would mean they would have to have an entirely different boomerang system implemented to make it more of a feasible main weapon. Or at least vastly improve the boomerang system in order for it to become a much better secondary weapon. I can also imagine plenty of plot changes from things like find the Master Sword into find the Overlord Boomerang, or whatever. But what's interesting is that this is still not even the greatest change made to Zelda. This isn't even close to the biggest thing that could have been. Because the original Zelda was also going to implement a time-traveling system where Link travels between two times.
That sounds familiar. Isn't that basically what A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time did? Meaning they just saved that idea for later?
Well, yes and no. The time-traveling mechanic was scrapped mainly because the NES was completely unable to handle all of the information a system like that would require. But no, what makes this full-on lost content, a forgotten idea, still yet to be implemented, is that Link was intended to time travel into the future. Though, not a future like our own, rather a future like that of Final Fantasy. A world full of seemingly futuristic technology, computers, cars, indoor plumbing, but really, it's all powered by mana. Well, maybe not the plumbing. You can still see some remnants of this idea in the concept art, especially this outfit of future Zelda. By the time this idea was brought up again, that being Link traveling into the future rather than the past, was during development of Ocarina of Time. But the Nintendo higher-ups all persuaded the development team against it, since Zelda had now had an established formula, and they should probably stick to it, stay safe. Meaning, if the original Zelda did indeed manage to have Link travel into the future, then the Zeldas of today could all be incredibly different. Zelda's current director, Aonuma, has tried a few times to bring in futuristic elements, starting off slow with things like steamboats and trains and even robots in Skyward Sword. And now in Zelda Wii U there's some sort of mechanical laser-shooting hermit crab, and Link has a sort of laser bow, though these again are probably mana-based, like Final Fantasy. So Aonuma is still playing around with this idea of a futuristic setting for Zelda, though little bits here and there, testing it out, testing the waters, as it will. And it's cool to know that these ideas were all started from the original Zelda.
But wait, what about A Link to the Past? Spirit Tracks, Zelda 2?
They, very simply put, don't have enough content to speculate about what could have been with them.
Ah, excellent. The Road of Fate has many paths, and if these removed ideas and concepts were to remain in the Legend of Zelda games, their destiny would have painted a drastically different picture for each story and the entire legacy. But all we can do now is wonder what could have been.
And thank you for watching our speculation on what the Legend of Zelda franchise could have been. But this is only half the project.
On my channel, we explore what could have been in the Kingdom Hearts series, taking all the cut content and using it to speculate on the potential paths the series could have taken.
It's pretty lore heavy.
Well, with Kingdom Hearts, isn't it always? I'll see you guys there. Click here or in the link in the description. Until then, keep up the hype
and never Stop using that noggin.